Ever felt completely wiped out just from a totally normal, everyday conversation? Or maybe you found yourself stuck in this endless, relentless loop of overthinking and you just can't shut it off. Well, you are in exactly the right place. Let's dive right into today's explainer, where we're unpacking the hidden mechanics of why highly analytical minds sometimes feel this intense need to withdraw, and more importantly, how we can actually reclaim our inner peace. We're going to explore the neurobiology, the psychology, and even some ancient philosophy behind these very real experiences.
We're starting off with this really powerful realization. An hour of shallow conversation costs you more than it gives back. For a highly intelligent mind, socializing comes with a hidden tax. It often feels way more like a drain than a joy. You know, society loves to tell us that being smart is just this pure advantage, like a golden ticket to success. But as our sources reveal, it also comes with this incredibly unique psychological architecture that makes ordinary social settings completely exhausting.
So, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll cover 1. The burden of intelligence. 2. Why we suddenly disappear. 3. The pain of ghosting. 4. Overthinking and the sociometer. 5. Solitude versus isolation. And finally, 6. Reclaiming your inner peace. Let's get right into it. Part 1. The burden of intelligence. Why smart people struggle socially. The absolute crucial point here is understanding that intelligence is a complex psychological structure that can actually create quiet, almost invisible social barriers. And it really all comes down to something called cognitive load. If you have a highly analytical brain, you likely have what psychologists call a high need for cognition. Basically, your brain is literally wired to constantly hunt for stimulation. It wants to analyze patterns, it wants to explore deeper meanings. So when you get trapped in surface-level small talk, chatting about the weather or just random everyday stuff, your brain can't find a logical anchor. And honestly, it's not that you're cold or arrogant, not at all. You are simply experiencing a massive cognitive overload because your brain naturally craves deep analytical anchors that small talk completely lacks. Look at these 8 very specific struggles. I think it is so validating to reframe these. Everything from analysis paralysis to the crushing pressure of perfection, not as character flaws, but as biological defense mechanisms. For example, if you're a bit slow to respond in a conversation, people might think you're just distracted, but really, your brain is running this incredibly deep cognitive processing network. You're predicting motives, evaluating variables, anticipating misunderstandings. Or take social awkwardness. You might have a sky-high IQ, but your brain struggles to decode the highly illogical emotional elements of human situations, which ends up looking like a lower EQ. Moving on to part 2. Why we suddenly disappear. That overwhelming urge to vanish and protect your peace. Let's look at how that massive cognitive load leads to a pretty drastic behavioral result, suddenly disappearing from everyone's life without a single word. Imagine being at a crowded party. For most people, the cognitive load there is pretty low. They just listen, laugh, respond. Easy, right? But your mind is acting like a multi-channel radio. While someone is talking to you, you are simultaneously auditing the subtext, reading these microscopic shifts in their tone of voice, and calculating the long-term consequences of a joke. This constant, heavy background processing just burns through your mental battery. You aren't antisocial, your battery is just finite. And that sheer exhaustion is what leads you to quietly withdraw, just to conserve your energy by stepping away from all the noise. Part 3. The pain of ghosting, when disappearing hurts someone else. Because, look, we have to examine the other side of the coin here. What exactly happens in the brain when someone suddenly disappears on us? It's one thing to step back to protect your own peace, but it's another entirely when that withdrawal is completely abrupt and without any explanation. If you have ever been ghosted, you know for a fact that it hurts deeply. But it turns out it's not just a metaphor. Research by Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA actually proves that social rejection, like being ghosted, activates the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula. Simply put, the sting of sudden silence literally registers in your brain as physical pain. It's wild. Ghosting completely deprives you of closure, shifting all the emotional labor onto your shoulders, which leaves your mind desperately scrambling to complete the pattern. And this dynamic perfectly highlights the contrast in attachment styles when it comes to ghosting. On one hand, you have anxious individuals. They will obsessively scan for closure. Their attachment system just stays fully activated, which drives severe self-blame to try and soothe their fear of abandonment. But on the other hand, avoidant individuals, who, by the way, are actually the most likely to ghost others, they just completely suppress the emotional response to escape the discomfort.
They interpret emotional closeness as an outright threat. So for them, ghosting isn't usually intentional cruelty. It's just an immediate escape hatch.
Which brings us to part 4, overthinking and the sociometer, the hidden mechanics of self-worth. This is the underlying psychological machinery that drives our relentless overthinking whenever we feel rejected, disconnected, or, honestly, just socially overwhelmed. Okay, let's look at this specific neural pathway, the default mode network, or DMN. This is the network that switches on the second your mind turns inward, and when it becomes overactive, it acts as the ultimate engine of overthinking, making it incredibly, intensely difficult to pull your attention away from those distressing mental loops. Self-critical beliefs act like central hubs here. Just one tiny mistake or one perceived rejection activates the entire network, blowing up a minor concern into a massive, overwhelming narrative of inadequacy.
Now, to fully grasp why social rejection triggers this network so fiercely, we really need to ground this in Mark R. Leary's foundational framework known as the sociometer theory. Because if you think about it, to survive evolutionary history, early humans couldn't just want company. We absolutely needed to ensure we were accepted by the tribe to literally survive.
What's really fascinating here is the definition itself. Self-esteem is not an ego trip. It is an evolutionary gauge meant to protect you by monitoring your relational value to the group. You don't have a need for self-esteem just for the fun of it. When your self-esteem suddenly plummets after being left out or ghosted, it's really just your sociometer flashing a giant red warning light that your social acceptance, your value to the group, might be dropping.
Part 5. Solitude versus isolation. Navigating the divergence. Armed with all this neurobiological context about why we overthink and why we withdraw, we really have to learn how to distinguish between healthy separation and toxic withdrawal. Because they might look totally identical from the outside, but internally, they are worlds apart.
The most vital, absolutely crucial distinction we can make is this. Chosen solitude restores your peace without guilt, whereas forced isolation traps your mind in an avoidant, insulating loop of rumination. Solitude feels clean. You come out of it feeling lighter. Isolation, though, it drags this low hum of guilt right behind it. When you tell yourself, hey, I'm just protecting my peace, you have to be radically honest with yourself. Are you stepping towards self-discovery, or are you just avoiding the discomfort of connection?
And finally, Part 6. Reclaiming your inner peace. The toolkit. Let's lay out a concrete roadmap of psychological and philosophical strategies to actually protect our peace without just locking the entire world out.
We can directly apply this modern cognitive behavioral therapy protocol to heal from rumination and rejection. It starts with phase 1, a strict communication moratorium. Seriously, do not send another message. Protect your psychological resources. Then you move into cognitive restructuring to actively challenge those self-critical narratives. You weren't ghosted because you aren't enough. You were ghosted because they lacked communication skills. Make sense? Next, you construct a helpful narrative during meaning making before pushing into behavioral recovery, like finally getting back to the hobbies you loved before all this distress. And finally, integration. That's where the event becomes a learned lesson, not a defining trauma.
And we can heavily supplement this modern psychology with ancient Stoic wisdom to deal with difficult people. The Stoics relied on acceptance, amor fati, acknowledging reality exactly as it is without wasting precious energy wishing it were different. Then there's detachment, apatheia, which, by the way, isn't coldness at all. It's just freedom from being controlled by irrational emotions. And finally, understanding. Using reason to see that a difficult person's behavior is usually just a symptom of their own internal conflict and fear. You control your perception. By reframing their actions, you protect your own inner citadel.
So, I'll leave you with this final, rather provocative thought from our sources to ponder long after this explainer ends. When you choose to withdraw, when you cancel those plans or step back from a relationship, are you stepping toward your authentic peace, or are you just running away? Because remember, literally anyone can walk away, but it takes profound wisdom to protect your peace while still remaining reachable to the rare few who truly feel like home. Thank you so much for joining me today. Take care of your mind out there, and I will catch you in the next explainer.